entry for the Patreon request of the anime series Crest of the Stars. Really, you got me paying attention to something that I should have already known existed, but like the loser I am, I kinda didn't. But then again, maybe that's because I grew up without access to much cable television. Crest of the Stars began as a series of novels in 1996 by author Hiroyuki Morioka. In 1999, it was adapted into a 13-episode anime series, and in 2000 became a nearly identical manga, and both of which were published in the United States, with Bandai releasing and distributing the anime in 2001, and Tokyopop licensing and publishing the manga in 2004. The anime had an English dub that aired on Tech TV in 2002, and I guess that's part of why I didn't know much about it, because I lived in a house that didn't have Tech TV. From a brief glance, the series looks like a pretty generic space opera. But what's the actual plot?
Far off in distant space, the planet Martine in the Hyde solar system is invaded by the Empire of the Ob. The powerful Ob offer a choice: surrender or be destroyed. In what appears to Martine's inhabitants as the ultimate betrayal, President Rocklin surrenders and becomes a minion of the Ob. His son, the young Jinto, is sent away to study and learn the ways of the Ob, as befits his new rank. After years of study, Jinto is ready for the next phase of his training, and he is finally going to meet an Ob. When an officer of the Star Forces arrives to accompany him, he meets the lovely Lafiel, first princess of the royal house of Abril. Little do these two unsuspecting souls realize how entwined their destinies are to become.
I suppose that description is fairly accurate, based on its most basic roots. But upon further investigation, there's a whole heck of a lot going on, and I'm really sad to say this, but this might be one of the first Patreon request reviews where I don't necessarily think I can recommend the thing that I just watched. For starters, I went to the manga first, despite the fact that it was published a year after the anime, but really, I ultimately found that they told almost an identical version of the story. While Tokyopop released several volumes, the first volume, referred to as the Seikai Trilogy, covers all 13 episodes of the anime. The story features a human by the name of Jinto. As a young boy, his home world is attacked by a race of people called the Ob. The Ob are a race that evolved from people after they messed around with their own genes to make themselves live twice as long, stay beautiful and young-looking forever, and for some reason have blue hair and elf ears. So this race attacks the planet, and the president gives up and becomes a member of the Ob's government. Well, Jinto's the president's son, so that automatically makes him some sort of nobleman in the Ob's government too. So we immediately jump 7 years, and Jinto has lived as a normal kid as best as he could until his father finally sends him off to the Ob military academy to get some Ob training of some kind. This is where he's picked up by the princess of the Ob, Lafiel, who also happens to be undergoing military training. And then war breaks out for some reason, and the two of them have to travel together to some other location safely for some other reason. I made it sound simple enough, but it's really not all that simple at all, because a huge problem weighing down the series is that the Ob speak in a fictional foreign language. And the way that's represented in the manga is by occasionally replacing a perfectly understandable word in English, or Japanese, I guess, with a silly made-up word. Like, take for example, dosh is just another word for long imperial robes. Or lesui means patrol ship. Really, this wouldn't be so bad if this was only an occasional thing that the manga references. But it isn't. They use these foreign words constantly throughout the book. Like, I'm not kidding, it's almost on every single page. And then it gets to the point where there are multiple fake words in a single sentence. And it doesn't help that the Ob have fantasy names and made-up fantasy titles. In fact, the Princess Lafiel has at least 3 different royal or military titles that she's been given depending on what job she's doing at what point in time. So when you read conversations in the book, you get things like, Salel Lekshu was my father's Yofu. I was their Frium Neg. It's a Delbisks, right? No, a Gothlaka. You said that you were the Bel Paryunu. Could you tell me about your Libune? There are 120 individual space-time clusters confirmed at approximately 90 Zezabo each. They indicate a total Yadbiru of 4 ships. Frasate engines normal. Frasas confirmed. 1 minute until sword dilation. We've entered FWAS! And more often than not, there's not even any translator's notes for what you're reading, and this is the official Tokyopop publication. Oh, but there is a dictionary of words in the back of the book that you can use to readily and constantly flip back and forth to in order to catch the definitions of these made-up space fantasy words. And here's a list of them now. Okay, so that's the manga, but what about the anime? Well, it starts out with a space battle being performed by people speaking entirely in this fictional alien language. And each episode opens with a monologue about the Ob race of people in that same language, with subtitles in Japanese and English. In the original Japanese language audio, this fictional language really doesn't sound all that different from the Swedish chef from the Muppets. The opening credits show pretty space scenery accompanied by sweeping orchestral music befitting a dramatic Japanese space opera anime. I'd really expect no less, but then by that same token, the opening doesn't necessarily stand out from any other space anime that ever came before it. After the opening credits of the first episode comes some space chatter dialogue, some of which happens to be in English.
Unidentified flying object has been captured.
Target approaching. Direction 216. Node 94. Distance 153,000.
But don't get too used to that, because you'll never hear English in this series ever again. I don't get it. Why was it even there to begin with? And then it goes into really similar problems the manga has, where the characters will frequently use words in this fictional language rather than just straight up translating that fictional language either into Japanese or English. I mean, when the anime has opening narration in every single episode in the fictional language, then we know that their native language is something other than our own. So why does the anime need to keep reminding us of these fictional words? I get that they wanted us to feel the immersion of this fictional universe, but let me put it this way. I had to take immersion Japanese when I was living in Japan several years ago. It was totally worth it to learn Japanese, but let me tell you, it's frustrating. You don't just instantly pick up on it, you struggle with it and mentally kick yourself in the head when you're navigating subway systems and you just want to be able to read all the signs around you, but you can't. You get mad when you know you've heard a word before, but you can't remember for the life of you why you know that word. Eventually you'll figure it out, and it's really rewarding, but it takes time. This smattering of this fictional space elf language is just as confusing, but you don't have the luxury of having a whole semester to learn their language through immersion, so you just get mad that different words keep coming up with no reference to what it is they're talking about. And yeah, sometimes you can figure it out through context clues, but that isn't always the case, not to mention there's so many foreign words that you'll sometimes confuse the use of one word for the use of another word. At least that was my experience with Crest of the Stars. But then there's another problem. In the manga, Tokyopop chose to translate everyone's names and titles phonetically, so when you read it, and if you already have casually heard Japanese pronunciation of words, you know exactly how people's names sound. But Bandai made a different decision. They instead have some sort of spelling that involves odd letters and sometimes silent letters, and I don't know if that's because that's the way the original author of the story intended it, or if Bandai just wanted to be cool and different. So Jinto, every time you see his name in the subtitled version, looks like Gintek, and Lafiel's name looks like Lamhir? And never mind listening to the people introduce themselves with their 800-mile-long fictional language full names and titles.
リンスーヌロックハイド伯爵講師
ジントです。
Honestly, this would be one time where I might consider using this as an argument for sucking it up and watching the English dub instead, so at least you can remember what their names are supposed to sound like phonetically. I mean, typically, I don't have a problem with English language dubs like a lot of other people seem to. But I have to admit, that dub is one of the hardest things to listen to.
Are you aware of the term theoretical probabilities?
Something like random guess?
That is quite accurate.
So just like in the manga, Jinto's home world is invaded by the Ab, and his father, the president, surrenders and takes on a position somewhere in the Ab Empire, which automatically makes Jinto some kind of duke or something. But he ends up pretending not to be part of the Ab Empire in school for the next 7 years, so everybody will just treat him normally. This is something we don't get to see, by the way. So when 7 years pass and Jinto's best friend in some kind of X-Men jacket goes to wish him well when he goes to join the Ab Military Academy that has some weird foreign name that I'll never remember, the audience feels nothing for their friendship. Nice to know you, kid. Bye! If there's one thing the anime manages to do better than the manga, it's that because there's 13 episodes in comparison to only a single volume of the manga, they can take more time to draw out and show the budding relationship between Jinto and Lafiel after she comes to pick him up and take him to their main ship. While the manga kind of rushes the pacing of everything, there are plenty of times where we can actually see Jinto starting to develop feelings for Lafiel, which the manga simply doesn't illustrate well at all. But the bad part of drawing it out means that it's not just their relationship that develops, but we also get endless political and battle strategy dialogue. There are very few opportunities that the anime takes to actually show us how the Ab people function within their societies. But get ready for them to tell you everything about it!
我らの生まれ方は？
君たちが人間の体で受胎しないことは知っているんだけど。
することもあるぞ。
I wouldn't mind reading about it, but I get so bored when I'm looking at a visual medium like a TV series where they tell but don't show. It's television for a reason, and that's just too bad because the Ab honestly do seem like they were written as kind of a fascinating society. It just would have been nice to see some of it aside from a bunch of battleships. Okay, so for some reason the ship that Jinto and Lafiel are on are attacked by somebody. And since Jinto is a duke or something, and he's a really important member of Ab society right now, the commander of the ship, who also happens to be Lafiel's mom, I guess, tells Lafiel to make an emergency escape with Jinto and get him to their final destination ahead of the warship, protecting him from battle. This triggers a long series of events from spaceports to planets, where Jinto and Lafiel are constantly running from attack or capture by somebody at every given moment. But the problem is that the series never really makes it very clear why it is this ship got attacked and triggered an all-out war. Okay, so the people who attacked this ship were the Four Nations Alliance. The Alliance is built up of people from 4 different communities that you will never see, and you just have to trust the series when they tell you these guys teamed up to agree that the Ab were bad. And since they don't like the way the Ab do things, then they started war, I guess. But aside from the occasional racism and prejudice of little things, I never saw a single example of people on these different planets being oppressed by the Ab. Like, the Ab took over a bunch of planets, but the show makes literally 0 examples of why this is a bad thing or how people's lives changed from that point forward. So I have absolutely no understanding of why this newly started war is so important. In fact, throughout the series, almost every single Ab character seems like a pretty decent person, so nope, I don't get it. By the end of the series, our characters have gone through a lot of talking and fighting and stuff. They eventually get to the space place where they were trying to get to since the beginning of the war, and I guess they're safe there. Then they tell us that Jinto is going off to do his military schooling for another 3 years, and that Lafiel will have more military flight training in that time, and they make plans to have Jinto on Lafiel's future ship in 3 years. And that's exactly what it jumps to. We don't get to see anybody's schooling or training, we just have a sudden 3-year time skip and end the series with them working together on the same ship, seeming to be happy to be near each other again. That's it. Still no better explanation of this war, and in fact the war is still going on. The series is just over. But I suppose that's a little unfair of me. After all, I was only asked to review Crest of the Stars. The truth is, the story continues on from there in a separate series called Banner of the Stars. To date, there are 5 novels published under this series, which have been made into 2 anime series and 1 2-episode OVA. And from my understanding, Morioka at some point stated that Crest of the Stars is really supposed to be an introduction to the characters of Jinto and Lafiel, but isn't supposed to be the central focus of his story. If that's true, then I certainly hope that the presentation of Banner of the Stars is much better than Crest of the Stars, because Crest of the Stars really failed at world building. I can see how a lot of thought went into the creation of this universe, but showing this universe to this audience in a visual medium, both in the manga and in the anime, fell really flat. So, as you can tell, I have not actually touched Banner of the Stars. Tokyopop did release more of the manga that goes into this continued storyline, and Bandai released DVDs in the US of the 2 full Banner of the Stars anime series. Maybe one day I'll give Banner of the Stars a shot, but I admit I'm feeling pretty burned after Crest of the Stars, and I'm feeling wary of this continuation. And it doesn't make it any easier that both Tokyopop and Bandai are companies that no longer distribute manga and anime in the US, so copies of these titles are really more expensive than I feel they're worth. Supposedly, Funimation saved these licenses in the US, but I haven't seen them re-release the anime series at all since they acquired them in 2013. Ultimately, maybe reading the novels for Crest of the Stars would be a good idea. I confess I've not done this, though Tokyopop did in fact publish those first 3 official novels in English back in 2006 and 2007. But given that the manga and the anime are nearly identical to one another in many ways, except for how much butt they're willing to show to the audience, I can't imagine that their novel source is that much different. In the end, this series was difficult for me to get through in both formats, with too much reliance on fantasy language and not enough showing the audience why things are the way that they are, rather than telling us through long bouts of exposition. Unfortunately, in the end, I simply can't recommend it. But maybe one day I'll get around to watching Banner of the Stars, and maybe I'll find that it eventually redeems itself. We'll see. Regardless, I want to thank Jeffrey for his recommendation of Crest of the Stars, and I'm looking forward to working on my next request review.
気休めに僕を自由にしないでおくれ昔なら